Welcome to the Behaviour Speak podcast. Now, here's your host, Ben Ryman.
Welcome to another episode of the Behaviour Speak podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ben Ryman. Today in the podcast, we have a conversation that's been bouncing around for a lot of months, and it's finally happening. Saturday morning with Adrienne Bradley. Welcome to the podcast, Adrienne.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
Hello. So excited to have this conversation. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that I'm producing this podcast on the lands of the Klehus, Hoboko, Comox, and Kala'amin First Nations, who were one community before we colonizers, settlers came in and separated them into reserves all over the place. So much that the island that I live on, which the Talaman people call Sayayin, which has some translation to sort of, it's very simple, like rock in the sea or something like that. Kind of had its history erased in terms of the indigenous people, let's say about, I don't know, 100 years ago or so. And they created, and the white man created a myth that the Talaman people thought Texada Island was a sea monster that had risen out of the sea and scared everybody away. Now, first off, a complete falsity, and in fact, there's actually archaeological evidence of the Talaman people being here in the 20th century, and actually for thousands of years. But I was just kind of reflecting on the whole sea monster sort of story, and it's so, what's the word for it? It's a bad word. It's so like dehumanizing, I think, to sort of take a great people that have been around for, time immemorial and say that they're dumb enough to think an island is a sea monster. Like, and that was the perspective in the story that they told. And actually, when I moved here, locals actually believe this, that these people that just live across the ferry, they have their own, they have one of the earliest sort of, not earliest, but I think one of the most recent sort of independent First Nations that signed a treaty with the government recently. They have their own, they've produced so many important people like in Canadian culture. Like it's not just like, I don't know a lot about all First Nations, but if they're all like this, then I think we're just scared of them. You and I were talking about in the beginning about Black excellence. We were also talking about melanin and how the power of that would it be like a hormone? What is melanin? What is it actually? It's a chemical.
Chemical nutrient.
Yeah.
Sorry to the biologist.
Yeah, pigmenting thing. I should have actually asked Celeste Malone, whose episode I just released, because I think she said she started with a degree in like biology or chemistry, so she might even have a better answer there. But anyway, point being, the communities that we think we're better than, and the white man thinks that they're better than, and try to destroy. More and more, I'm sort of coming to this perspective that it's, and not that these other communities think they're better than us, but I think that in some ways this is coming out of some sort of innate jealousy I think we have, towards some of these communities, because we're talking about the melanin making Black folks look young for forever, and I was talking about people I interviewed in the podcast that I thought were like in their 20s and they're older than me, and with all this experience and knowledge, and talking about these indigenous folks who have just done. I'm just learning more and more about their culture and more about just some of the amazing sort of things they've done sort of over the years. They're so ahead of the game in so many ways for so long. Anyway, so just trying to dispel that myth. So I've got a project coming up, and I shared this on another episode, to try to educate islanders on the history of the Talaman people here through a disc golf course. which just seems like a strange sort of medium to educate people on the history of First Nation. But I put a proposal in a few years ago to get a disc golf course put it on the island because I like playing disc golf, and we've got a ton of land here. And it was during the pandemic, so we're looking for kind of social distance friendly activities, and disc golf's a great social distancing activity. And so the local government put one in, and but they put it in on these lands that are Tla'amin lands, and or like unceded anyway. And so I just had a great meeting with the government there last week, and they've given me permission to connect with the Tla'amin First Nation and have them.
Very nice.
Pardon me?
Very nice.
Yeah, and have them help design all the signage for the disc golf course. And so what I want to do is I want to have Indigenous art like on all the signs, but I also want to have like sort of like a bit of Indigenous history on like sort of each golf. I don't know if you know disc golf, but there's just like little baskets like kind of like golf, and they've got little signs on each tee box.
No, I grew up in suburbia, so I know all about disc golf.
Oh, okay, right on. And so I want like each sign to sort of, talk about an area on the island from the Indigenous perspective, and because there's a lot of places that have sort of special sacred value to the Tla'amin people, and kind of get that out. And the fact that they're supporting that is great. And then we've got a local Indigenous artist that just moved to the island that I'm hoping to get involved with designing some of that stuff. So that's fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, grateful to be here, and grateful to have Adrienne on the podcast. So Adrienne, I feel like, I know you haven't been on the podcast before, but I feel like we've had so many conversations. I feel like we already have, but and I was about to sort of bypass sort of the whole introduction, origin story and stuff, but I'm not gonna. So maybe tell me a little bit about sort of your story about kind of how you got into ABA and doing the work you're doing now.
Yeah. So it's not a long story. If anyone knows me, I kind of build my what I do in my research around being a young behavior analyst. I would have been a behavior analyst. I became a behavior analyst in August of 2018. So it'll be 5 years in this upcoming August. And I feel like I have done so much in those 5 years. So I started off, I went to Central Michigan University, which for those who are watching, I am putting up the mitten of Michigan. And so Central Michigan University is like right in the middle of Michigan, like going north though. So Mount Pleasant, Michigan. I grew up in Troy, Michigan, which is like a suburb of Detroit. So about 20 minutes outside of downtown Detroit. And so when I went to Central, I had played soccer in high school. And fun fact, I've had about 5 knee surgeries, all in high school.
Oh my gosh.
From playing soccer. I was a rough player. I was a fast runner. I could score some goals. So I was always like midfielder, forward, top front, top right. And so with that, I did a lot of damage to my knees. And I was the player that like when you got hurt, I was like, I'm not hurt. Like I gotta get back out there, right? Like I was a gritty young Black girl growing up in white suburbia, and I was good. And so, but I damaged my body, and I'm feeling it now. So I thought I wanted to be an orthopedic physician's assistant, work with athletes, or military. I had a really good family friend. The dad was in the military, and that was like my first experience there. And they were really, really close friends of our family. And so I get to college. Chemistry is not my jam. Science is not my jam. Physics is not my jam. And those are all prerequisites in order to be a physician assistant. And so I was like, nope, let's switch over to physical therapy,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like I've been in
makes
physical
sense.
therapy. I'm still on this like muscles and the body, and I love it. I have a degree in kinesiology, and I
Hmm,
really love like the medical side of things, the
nice.
pathophysiology and things like that. That still required science. So then I had a minor in psychology. And I was like, okay, well, kinesiology, I could go do OT, right? Again, let's just like bring it down. We're still
Totally.
staying
A lot of
down
options there. Yeah.
healthcare, right? Yeah. I graduate college thinking that I'm gonna go, be an OT. I had been looking into colleges, and I had gotten involved in the Professional Development Association for Black Occupational Therapists. It's
Hmm,
called the NBOTC, the National Black Association of Occupational Therapists, something. Um, and so I got involved with the local chapter there. They had ran the program director of the OT program at Wayne State University, which was a really competitive program, was a Black woman, and so had
there
worked
you
with
go.
her. Blah blah blah. So I got a job in the schools. I was a parapro when I graduated college. And one of the older parapros was like, "Have you heard of ABA?"
Hmm,
And I was like, "No." But you sit around at the lunch table and you're like, God, we really need some training. Like I was seeing some very horrific things, kids getting physically managed because they were, engaging in behaviors, and the teachers, like, there weren't BCBAs in the schools. You
hmm,
had an ASD consultant who would
yeah.
be like, if a kid's spitting, give him a cup. Give
Hmm,
them a cut, telling these teachers who have no behavior management training, parapros, to give this kid a cup who's in a severely SXI program, and it was all these things. So um, the parapro had told me about ABA. I had Googled and I had done my research, and I was like, behavior. Like, what else is out there for these kids on the spectrum who I'm seeing
hmm,
that are engaging in a lot of behavior, that have very little skill set. There's no services. Speech is not helping. OT is not helping.
hmm.
The school psychologist is so overwhelmed,
Yes.
and it's not behavior analysis, right? And so I had applied to a program, Wayne State University's program, and I fell in love. I was like, okay, I don't want to be OT. I don't want to be a
Hmm,
physician assistant. I want to be a BCBA, and I want to change behavior. And I had just felt like this is where I need to be,
hmm,
and I wouldn't change my job for the world. Some people are like, oh, I thought about doing this, or maybe I'll do that. I'm young, and I'm like, no, this is exactly where I want to be,
hmm,
Um, so I had applied to the program. And this part is the untraditional part that I think has propelled me into the area that I am now. That at such a very young, I'm 31. I
hmm,
turned 31 March 5th.
hmm,
So, this month, and I've been a BCBA for 5 years. So I solely believe, and I shout them out all the time, my practicum experience was one of the best experiences to this day.
hmm.
And Dr. Krista Clancy was the director over the University of Pediatricians Autism Center, where UPAC, where in Michigan I did my practicum.
Hmm.
I had my very first supervisor. Her name was Carly Steiner, and she owns the Carlisle Center in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. And Carly, just for I was with her for a couple months before she moved on, but really introduced me to the science and how to apply the science.
Hmm.
So, Carly, if you're listening to this, like, you really mean so much to me in my
Hmm.
career. Dr. Clancy as well, and the whole UPAC team. As we had our gripes, but it was the best experience. And
Hmm.
so I kind of bypassed being a behavior technician. I got propelled into being a case manager. At the time, Medicaid would let you bill if you had a master's
Hmm.
or were in a master's program. And so I got to really get supervisory experience from inception, right?
Mm.
I don't think that everyone gets that, right?
Yeah.
And it really allowed for me to work on my supervisory, my people management skills, and at the guidance of those wonderful women. And so, I became a BCBA, had my own caseload. I was supervising practicum students before I even had a BCBA, in
Mm.
partnership with my supervisor at the time. And so it really showed me that I love the caseload life, but it also showed me I love the BCBA mentorship, the
Yes.
BCBA development life, and doing that through caseload. And so I was the only Black woman BCBA for the entire company. I worked in the middle of Detroit, and Detroit is 88% Black and African American. And as wonderful as my experience was, um, there were still areas that were not so wonderful, right?
Mm.
And so because of those experiences and the things that I was experiencing, my families were experiencing, I, knew that I needed to find a community of Black clinicians and think about the development of Black clinicians specifically, and clinicians of color in this field, period.
Mm.
And so that's what really sparked my interest with BABA, and my trajectory there, and all the things we've been able to accomplish. That's what also sparked my interest in leadership development, because of my own development, my own
Mm.
experience, and what I'm seeing as younger clinicians than me, and the type of mentorship and sponsorship that I receive, and also just my development into equity of services too, right? I do a lot in that area,
Mm.
and ensuring equity of services, equity of knowledge, inclusiveness of that. I dabble in DEI, but mainly on equity of things. I'm not a diversity recruiter. I cannot tell you how to be more inclusive,
Mm.
but I can work on systems to ensure equity of our services, right? And equity of practicum experiences. So that's just a little about how I got into into this, and it's very long-winded. So
I love that you
um,
call that a little, um, and a not very long history. I mean, granted, I mean, I know you haven't been in the field that long, but like you said, you have done a lot in the last 5 years, and I think that can also speak to sort of, there's a, what is it, something, there's a lot of new behavior analysts in our
mhm.
field,
Yes.
and
Yes.
but there's also an assumption that because they're new, they don't know anything. And I don't think you fit that mold in any way.
Yes, I was just watching a video, and I also was just at APBA, where Jim Carr talked about the infrastructure and the growth concerns of ABA. But I was watching a video that was saying, we talk about how millennials this, Gen Z this, right? We don't know how to be loyal. We don't know, what we're talking about. We, talk too much about our experiences and not about the facts and things like that.
Mm.
Um, but someone said, I'm a millennial, I'm a Black woman, and I check off all of your boxes, and I'm still not good enough for you,
Mm.
right? And that's how I feel sometimes, as a young clinician in this field, representing a, a whole. I represent 55% of our field, right? 55% of our field were certified since 2018. I'm
Mm.
that representation. And so as I hear and I go to these things, and they're like, these young people this, these young people that, and then I get up and I'm like, hey, I'm that young person, and I'm going to talk to you about leadership development, conflict resolution and things like that. So, don't sleep on people, I think, just because
Hmm.
you
Well, and
think
it's and I'm sure you're hearing a lot of, what do you know?
what do I know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you're young, you're Black,
Yeah.
you're
I'm a woman.
you're a woman, and you haven't been doing this very long to their standards,
Mhm.
and but if you're a man and you're white and you've been doing this for 50 years, then you know everything.
Right.
You know,
Right. Right. But I just, Dr. Danielle Beal, a very wonderful friend, has really taught me how to kill with kindness.
mm, mm,
And I keep going, and I encourage everyone to keep going, because what I have been able to accomplish in these 5 years, and still have very grand ideas. The sky's the limit for everybody, regardless.
yeah. I've heard of a few folks that I've interviewed talk about sort of the situation of sort of being the only Black professional in their company or in the school or in their class or whatever. And again, this is assumption and ignorance on my part, but being in Detroit, I make assumptions. But you say that Detroit is 88% Black, and yet you're working in a company where you're the only Black professional. And why is that?
America. America.
Yeah.
I know the field of behavior analysis is, just now coming around to talking about the DEI issues and the solutions to those issues, right? I think that I'm someone who looks at both perspectives, right? And being in that situation, right? Was it solely that, the company that I was working for flat out just didn't want to hire any Black clinicians? No, not at all. Not whatsoever. I was a Black woman who were developed by these women, right? And to this day get opportunities, and it's bi-directional and things like that, right? And I'm not saying that was everybody's experience, though.
Sure.
Right. And because it was not everybody's experience. And so I think that in one breath, the company that I worked for also had a lot of other variables at play as to why people of color weren't applying to them, i.e. being that my first salary as a BCBA was $55K. Nothing. I could barely afford my bills as a person with a master's and a BCBA. And so I had to I chose to sacrifice the money over my practicum experience and over the development of me as a clinician. Not many people of color can do that, right? They have kids, they have, bills, and even with that, right, they have to earn a certain amount. So there was that. But then also in the field of behavior analysis, Black individuals make up 3.57%, right? Do I think that our field should have been doing a better job at diversifying? We should have been going to the job fairs at the community colleges to get technicians to introduce them to this field, right? We have a BCBA undergraduate, program. Do I think that ABA programs and the recruitment departments should do a better job in that? Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Do I think that there are some leadership development skills that generation of clinicians needs to work on as they're working with people of color? Absolutely. There's a research article, not in behavior analysis, it's actually in counseling. And it looked at, and I'll try to get the article as well. But it looked at the difference in the supervisory perspectives and experience based off of the color of your skin. So it looked at which cultures kind of worked better together in a supervisory relationship. And so what it found was that white clinicians, white supervisors felt more comfortable with Asian supervisees than any other race, right? And the races that they felt like they did not have the best relationship with were Black and African American and Indigenous individuals. And it looked at cultural factors that could have influenced this experience. So when you think about cross-cultural supervision, here we go. When you look at the stereotypical characteristics and personalities and how Asian individuals are raised up to be, you tend to see more passive characteristics. You tend to see more respect for authority, but it's how they are raised and things like that. You tend to see, in relation to the verbal language that is used,
Yes.
in relation to your body language and things like that. Us as Black individuals, we have a certain level of resiliency skills that we have to ensure we make known, right? And what does that look like as far as conflict resolution skills in Black individuals and Indigenous individuals versus Asian individuals and maybe Latinx individuals, right? And that can even go to what do we experience in society, right? It's not the oppressive game or anything like that, but again, another article just looked at that Black and African Americans and Indigenous individuals are the two most oppressed experience, society, laws, your everyday individual. And like I said, it's not the oppressed, Olympics, but, what does that look like in relation to this study? So this study was assessing the barriers and changes of cross-cultural supervision, a case study. Judy Daniels, Michael DeAndrea, and Brian Sue Kim released this in 1999. And everything is still applicable today. So, I do think that as we're thinking about why do certain companies tend to lean more towards having people of color and not, we have to think about not only recruitment efforts, but also the leadership skills and the acceptance of cross-cultural situations. And are we properly trained in that? Or do we just assume this color blindness of like, well, my supervision skills should be the same across the board? And that's just not the case. Dr. Marlisha Bell just keynoted at QABA. Shout out to Dr. Marlisha Bell keynoting in front of 2,700 people. At QABA, but she talks about culturally responsive mentorship and supervision and having to look at that a little bit differently.
Totally. I'm just taking lots of notes. Which I don't need to do because I'm recording. Bunch of stuff there. I got a lot of icky feelings when you were talking about the cross-cultural study and sort of the white professionals' preference for the Asian supervisees over the Black Indigenous or whatever. And because, my initial assumption as you were talking was the reason they preferred, Asian folks was because of the skin color. So, Asian folks, can be, more white presenting in a way, as far as sort of the skin color. But then when you go on to say, no, it's essentially because this is a group that we think we can have power over them. We can control them because of their sort of, nature of sort of, their sort of cultural norms of interaction and whatnot. That we can actually control them. And particularly, I know there's certainly some Asian cultures where, men in particular are considered to be, above in those cultures. And so if you're a male supervisor with a female Asian supervisee and you prefer that, you're preferring it because, they'll essentially smile and nod to everything you say, is your belief anyway, whether that's the case for all of them.
And the cool part about this is that they looked at all like unconscious factors, right? Their body language. How did the white supervisor respond? Body language across the same topics, the same experiences, or different experiences, same topic, right? And based off of language, tone, patience, waiting, all of these non-cultural color factors. So for those of us who are like, well, how do we know it was because of the color of their skin? Okay, they took that factor out, but saw a correlation because of the color of their skin and how they were reacting.
Oh, I hate the how do we know question.
How do we know this was racist?
Exactly.
How do we know?
You said one of the things you're really focuses on kind of the equity piece of sort of DEI. You're not really a diversity recruiter kind of person, and that resonated with a conversation that I had with Dr. Celeste Malone. I just released her episode today on. She's a school psychologist, and we were talking about recruitment. We were talking about kind of why there isn't, because school psychology has a similar stat to behavior analysis. I think you said 3.57% or something like that, and I've heard other folks I've seen the t-shirts 3.93% for a sort of a different stat, but anyway, around 4%, and that's also the same number in school psychology. So the percentage of black school psychologists in the field of school psychology is about 4%. And I was talking to a white colleague in the education system about this, and sort of about the conversation I had with Dr. Malone, and about sort of why there's so and how there's so few black school psychologists in the field, and this colleague of mine said, well, are they applying to get into these programs? And I said, well, yes, of course, but but they're either, but there's a whole. We kind of went into the whole systemic piece, all the way back to some of the conversations I've had with like Nicole Hollins and Maeve Oberon and others who work in the school setting about, kind of the whole advanced placement stuff, and and even going back to kindergarten all the way to the sort of discipline sort of pieces, and black kids getting disciplined in kindergarten,
in kindergarten,
and
what people don't know about me is I grew up I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and I went to Meharry preschool and kindergarten. Meharry Medical School is out that way, and so they had a preschool program that my mom would drop me off to while she was in her master's. We got spanking.
Wow.
All the time from school personnel. If that happens now, and you guys are over here talking about CRT, I'm like, what's the real issue here? And that still happens to this day.
And of course, more so with the black kids, like disproportionately. But also, so there's the whole systems reason of even, black folks getting to the point of being able to apply to school psychology. Like, a lot of the folks that I talk to in school psychology or ABA, it's only because of, maybe their own privilege of sorts that they've been able to make it this far. Many folks are, and a term I didn't understand before, but many folks are these are, and I'm sure you're quite familiar with, are first generation, attendees, and I didn't understand what that meant forever, but essentially it means they're the first person intergenerationally in their family to make it this far in school. Like most of them, didn't even make it through high school for, again, those systemic reasons. So that's part of it for sure. And so sort of pushing all of the obvious systemic problems that prevent Black folks from even making it this far. If they do make it this far, if they do get into the programs, and there are programs that they're getting into, and I know we're going to be we'll probably touch a bit on the historically Black colleges and universities, and what we're trying to what you folks are trying to do there in ABA. I think Celeste said there was 2 school psychology programs in those universities. One that she works at Howard, another one at, I think, Bowie, or I'm not sure. Bowie, thank you. I want it to be Bowie because it looks like David Bowie, the spelling.
No, I call it Bowie too, but now that I live in Maryland, they're like, no, it's Bowie. I said, where's the extra O?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's Bowie.
It's like your point before we pressed record that in Africa they call them zebras.
Right. It's
Where's
zebra,
the extra E?
For everybody out there, it's zebra.
It's a zebra. That striped horse is a zebra. Just so you know, get it right. Yeah. And so, barring all of that, they get into the programs. That's still not the reason why this is such a low percentage. Because it's not actually, well, I mean, it's certainly a recruitment issue as part of it, but recruitment isn't the main problem, at least in school psych, that Dr. Malone was saying. The problem is these folks get hired into schools, and then the school system is not equitable. And I think this is kind of probably what you're talking about. The system to support these folks once they get the jobs isn't there, and so they either burn out or they just get frustrated and want to get out because they come in and there's expectations like, okay, well, you can now deal with all of our Black kids. You can now deal with all of our Black problems. We're not going to change anything we're doing here now that you're here. We're not going to support you any different than we're going to support, other folks. In fact, we're going to probably support you less. And so the problem isn't, is not just, sort of this recruitment piece. It's the keeping people piece. And it sounds like maybe that's an area you're kind of working in. There is a lack of diversity when it comes to educational material depicting Black children in the field of applied behavior analysis. Human Expressions gives Black and brown children realistic and detailed images of kids who look like them, modeling everyday skills that may be difficult for them to communicate or express. At Human Expressions, the benefits of representation for Black and brown kids in educational curricula are clear. Increased self-esteem, reducing stereotypes, and increased validation and support. To learn more, go to www.humanexpressions.org. That's human, HUEMAN, expressions.org. If you're planning on collecting continuing education credits for this episode, you'll need to enter the 3 secret words at www.cbiconsultants.com/shop. The first secret word is historical.
Yeah. I think definitely we could get the jobs, but is that infrastructure of that job suitable to what my needs are as a person of color, as a Black woman, right? In isolation and onlyness, right? Dr. Nasia Srencion-Ulazi, who is a great friend, talks about onlyness in her Black Women in Leadership research article that she published a few years back, right? Is your company conducive for onlyness? Because that's where we're at right now. When we make up, between 3.57 and 3.93%, right, of the field, there's going to be some onlyness, right?
Sorry, what do you mean by onlyness?
Onlyness is that I am the only person in this identified in this category here at this job,
Gotcha.
right? So 9 times out of 10, what I have been used to in all of my workplaces is that I am the only Black woman in a supervisory level position.
Yes.
Because we don't got problems having Black technicians. We have problems going from a technician to a BCABA to a BCBA to the clinical directors to the owners of these companies. We have a pipeline problem. And so, the only person identified as, a lesbian at this place, the only Black male at this place, right? Onlyness. And what does onlyness do to how you show up at work? But what is that infrastructure as well? I think the biggest issue within the ABA realm is that we struggle even introducing Black people to ABA, introducing that there is another option. And what we don't realize is how we take advantage of the money that we make in this field. Okay. So let's take an RBT position. The RBT position needs a high school diploma, right?
Yeah.
Increasingly, there is more Black individuals who are getting their high school diploma or GED, right?
Yeah.
Instead of allowing them to go, instead of, having them go and work at the factory that does a lot of physical labor or at McDonald's that's not even paying them $15 an hour. But we know at the bare minimum, you could work with kids. You could have a very satisfying career as an RBT, introduce you to this whole nother option of a decently paying job. Doesn't have you working midnights, third shift. The latest you're going to work is probably about 7:30, on any given day. And you can get paid, depending on where you live, between $20 to $35 an hour.
Yeah.
Right? So let's just talk about the generational wealth that can be built off of just starting off at the RBT position, right? But as you said, if you are the first generation to, even question to go to college and question to go get your BCABA or BCBA, number one, I'm thinking about the financial piece. There's a CNN wrote a report that Black individuals have significantly less wealth than white individuals. And with that wealth means who can afford college. As college is getting increasingly more expensive, we're trying to figure out how we get this for free.
Yeah.
So that we continue having people in this system because it's gotten too expensive, right? To then go back and say, hey, yeah, go get your bachelor's, go pay for it yourself, and then do this very specialized thing, of behavior analysis. So our top priority issue is the financial ability of people, first generation people specifically, being able to afford an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree, right? And then you want to talk about the infrastructure of these places that we're going to work, right? And I'm not saying we need to make every behavior analysis program free and discounts for people of color and but what I am saying is that it's a factor that contributes to why we only have such a low percentage, on top of what are these behavior technicians experience in these white-owned places. If they are constantly experiencing racism, onlyness. Dr. Nasia says it in her article. Why would someone want a leadership position when they've been treated like crap from the leaders in that position? Why would we want to do that? We have to deal with enough resiliency factors that we have to display out in society. I spend 60% of my time at work where I'm experiencing onlyness, racism, microaggression. My family's being told this. I'm being talked to any type of way, by my white coworkers. Why do I want to be in a leadership position? Why do I want that? Right? So I'm going to leave and I'm going to go start my own company, even when I may not have the training and the thought or the mentorship to do this in a quality way. And that's what we're seeing, right? About 65% of our field is the ages of 18 to 34. It's a new demographic marker that the BACB came out with in January. 65% of our field is younger than 34.
Yes.
And it's only growing because, people retire, people, pass away, things like that. 34 is the cutoff. It's crazy, but it's the lack of quality assurance and DEI focus storm what it can bring.
And how and you're saying like a good chunk of these folks are just going off and starting their own companies like early on?
Yeah, early on. Like I know someone who's like, I'm building a website, building their infrastructure, building, how they're going to pay for services. They don't even have their BCBA yet, but they got a business coach because they're like, listen, I can't do this. If this is what the ABA agencies are and the experience is going to be like, let me go off and do my own thing where I'm my own boss. And I think that's why Black Americans in general have a very entrepreneurial mindset because of that, right?
Interesting.
And what has naturally developed.
Wow. Yeah. And then whatever I've definitely seen, the entrepreneurial of a lot of different people of color, but I didn't think of it as because the current systems and the current businesses that they could be working for, have all these problems.
Have all the problems. Why am I staying in a toxic place? I think that's what COVID has taught us the most. Right? The fastest growing population of educated individuals and entrepreneurs are Black women.
Yeah.
The fastest growing demographic sector is Black women. And that includes behavior analysis, that includes healthcare, that includes, anything.
Now, beyond the fact that, of course, these folks shouldn't be staying in these toxic environments. I get that. And I'm not sort of encouraging that by any means. Is this a problem that obviously it's a problem within those white workplaces, but is this a problem that all of these young Black professionals are being entrepreneurial and starting their own businesses and starting their own companies and basically becoming clinical directors after being BCBAs for a year and so on and so forth?
I'm not going to say it's a problem if the right supports are there. And not solely just on Black clinicians either. This is what we're seeing across the board of just young clinicians.
Yes, true.
I'm included in that, right? Yeah. I'm an entrepreneur. I have zero energy to own my own business, right? Same. I own me, and I own, I'll do some presentations, I do research, things like that, but I have zero desire to own my own ABA company in that manner.
But you work for an ABA company that's owned by a young professional, don't you?
Yeah. So Signature Behavioral Health is in Baltimore, Maryland, and Denisha Jingles is the owner of that company. So shout out to Denisha and Signature in Baltimore. I think that I'm not going to say that it's not a problem because we're not seeing the training and the development that needs to happen in order to handle quality assurance, right? When you go out to start something that you don't have experience in just yet, you're going to make mistakes. And that may be financial mistakes, that may be billing mistakes, that may be clinical development mistakes, hiring mistakes, things like that. But when you see so many people doing it at the same time, you're like, well, they did it. Why can't I do it? Yeah. Which is a very fair argument. Why not? Right. But I do think that we have to do a better job at, if we see that 65% of our field is below the age of 34, right? How are we doing in developing and addressing that problem? I'm all about solutions. I see a problem and I'm like, yes, that's great. We're going to talk about why this is a problem, but we also need to put energy towards getting a solution. And I think that's why I'm so very interested in staying in this leadership development realm, especially for clinicians who are like me, are young, are of color, are women, are millennials that have been told that we're, we suck since the day we turned 18.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it's so very important that we as a community in behavior analysis focus on develop the skills that need to be developed for leadership, the skills that need to be developed for entrepreneurs of color, right? You see shaping leaders, you see the BLAC, you see APBA, BABA. We offer so many cohort trainings and mentorship for our community, because if that is going to be the case, because of a issue that has been created, because we have not been focusing on the experience of BIPOC individuals, great. This is the reality. This is the dinner we got to eat. Now let's figure out how we're going to eat it and digest it and have a good time doing it.
So what can folks do? Because I mean, this is sort of the problem when you go start your own company as a young leader, young clinical director. And I think for a long time our world has thought, you got to be doing this job for a lot of years before clinical director sort of comes on your plate. And yet we have a lot of these people out there calling themselves CEOs and presidents and clinical directors. And like I said, they're some of them are under 30. I guess first off, number one, do these folks realize they need support to be leaders? And two, is that support available? Like where can they get that support?
To both of those questions, it's yes and no. I think there are some people who are like, listen, if, I'm going to figure it out and I don't want help. Some people don't want help. Some people don't do enough reflection to also realize they need help. Right. Therefore, is not seeking out the resources that are available to develop those skills. Right. There's always going to be that sector of the population.
Yeah.
But in this other sector, there are more organizations that are focusing on this. That was the theme at APBA. APBA was in Seattle, March 9th through the 12th. And the theme at APBA unintentionally was we are growing at a god-awful fast rate. And Dr. Jim Carr said it best that no other healthcare industry is growing or has grown previously and currently in the rate that behavior analysis is growing. We are growing from 2009 to 2018, we grew 3,751% in clinicians, right? There's a job posting for every clinician out there. There were over 57,000 BCBA, BCABA jobs posted last year, just in 2022.
Wow.
There are 58 or 60,000 BCBAs, BCABs. There's a job for every clinician we have in our industry, whether the job is where you want it to be is the question, but there's a job out there. And so as a field, especially professional development organizations, that BACB, APBA, ABAI sees this growth concern, therefore are focusing more on leadership development, right? I'm getting asked to speak more on it. Jim Carr is, going around to the different conferences speaking on it. There's Kara Regan, Manny Rodriguez, who are all speaking on this. And also, Dr. Daniel Moran, he's been speaking on this for some years. Leadership development and conducting acceptance and commitment therapy. I've been following him for years. R.B. Daniels, the OBM sector has these resources. And so I think the other thing is that we have to be intentional at developing things. We are very intentional learning about the science and the interventions and the strategies, but we're not as intentional in learning about how do we properly develop and manage people? How do we use our own science on ourselves as clinicians and as leaders, right? Which is why they're adding that OBM sector to the university program. That's to be 315 hours of OBM, and in that OBM is leadership development. Knowing the difference of supervisory skills and leadership skills.
Yes.
Those are two totally different things, right? There's difference between a supervisor, a mentor, sponsorship, and a leader. And you have to be intentional. Somebody at my leadership development and conflict resolution presentation that I did at APBA, there was a girl, she wore glasses, blonde hair, had on a white t-shirt. I can't remember her name, but I will remember her saying this probably for the rest of my career. So that was you, shout out to you, and I message me if you hear this. But she said, we have to be intentional at developing our leadership skills. And right now, we're not being intentional.
Mm.
We're not constantly seeing leadership development skills workshops at our conferences. We're not seeing, it's hard to get supervision
Mm.
content at conferences because we're all about maybe the ethics and maybe, and yes, the science and the
Mm.
application. But with the growth of our field, we gotta be able to do both, and we gotta shift.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and seeing more and more clinicians focusing on the development of skills as a leader, and an innovator and a thought person, is important.
Mm. And so, for sure it is, but how is it sort of different? How is leadership development going to be different for these young Black clinicians versus others?
Mhm. For leadership development and what and how you need to work on it is different per, demographic, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
kind of going back to that cross-cultural research article that we were talking about earlier, they looked at the body language, they looked at the tone, right? There's
Mm.
some different emotional regulation skills that Black women working in majority white areas or rural areas need than Black women working in the middle of Chicago with our,
Mm.
right? Because you're going to be facing two different types of people.
Yeah.
And your conflict resolution skills and your communication skills are two totally different ends of the spectrum there
Mm-hmm.
because of the environmental variables. So if we think about what environmental variables are at play per culture, right? And then what leadership development skills need to look like there, right?
Mm.
As a Black individual, I want to live a soft life. I, I want to, come in and have a supportive team, but I know we're not always going to get that. So
Mm-hmm.
part of my leadership skills is how do I motivate other people to provide support to Black women,
Mm.
right? And Black men, right? BMBA, Jerron Trotman, Black men in behavior analysis, what they need, even the intersectionality of a Black man working in a majority white woman field
Mm-hmm.
is totally different, right? They're scared to even give a woman a compliment. I think all men right now are all scared to give a woman a compliment, but especially a Black man who have been historically been told, you did something to me that is untrue. And that
Mm.
happens in the workplace. So
Yes.
what I teach that
Yes.
population is going to be totally different than what I'm going to say as a Black woman or an Indigenous woman, right?
Mm.
And so it absolutely has to look different, but it depends on your environmental variables, what are at play here, and what does that look like? One of the other things that us as Black leaders, we also have to work on showing up authentically ourselves and being confident to do that and to not code switch, even when the environment does not call for me to do
Mm.
that, right? Or creating the environment to not call for me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do it every day. And it's something that has to be at the forefront of my mind to not do.
So
Uh,
you code switch every day, or you try not to, or both?
I code switch every day, but I
Mm.
try not to
Mm.
at the same time. But
Mm.
after 30 years or 28 years of being conditioned to do that and being reinforced when I have done that,
Yeah.
what does that look like?
Yeah.
The
I,
unlearned.
and I know a little bit about code switching, and I get why Black people do it. A lot of it is sort of survival instincts and those sorts of things. Is there anything, like I don't know if someone's code switching,
Right. You
right?
wouldn't.
Like I don't know right now if you are or you aren't, right?
Mhm.
And probably because most of folks like me, our exposure to Black people has been when they've been code switching, in part, and so we just sort of assume that's, and when they haven't, and again, for folks like myself who were, before kind of really doing this podcast, I wasn't exposed to Black people at all. My only exposure to Black people would be on like, daytime TV, Jerry
You're
Springer or whatever,
right.
I know, again, I get it, not the greatest source of information. And, sort of, seeing, folks that I think folks on those shows probably aren't code switching much, um, uh, white or Black. I mean, there's some authentic selves that appear on some of that stuff.
Right,
Uh,
right.
um, um, are there things, that we can do as sort of, allies or white folks or whatever you want to call us, to help you not do that, to help you feel safer, in that way? And I don't know if that's the right question, because I'm not looking for, something I've been learning in sort of my kind of journey of, understanding other cultures is, it's not the other culture's job to, tell me how to,
Mhm.
be a good person. you know,
Right,
how can I not be a racist? No,
right.
we'll start by not being a racist. I'm not looking for sort of that, but I guess what I'm looking for are there things that, you know, you'd like to see, I guess, in the systems. Are there changes in the systems that that sort of, we can help work towards that would, help Black folks be their authentic selves in
Right.
sort of those contexts and
Yeah.
situations?
Yeah. Well, number one, I think the continual commitment and committed action, right? We talk about acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yeah.
The, the continued day to day committed action of being committed to anti racism,
Yeah.
right? It's one thing to be like, to recognize that there's an issue, right? But
Yeah.
it's another thing to like be committed to being an anti-racist and
Hmm.
to unlearn your things. Like as you
Yeah.
said, like up until this podcast, you had not interacted with a lot of Black individuals, and you've interacted
Hmm.
with quite a few. I
Hmm.
think majority of your guests now
Hmm.
identify
Getting
as
there.
of
Yeah.
color, if not Black clinicians,
Mm.
right? And so you see a pattern, right? If you're actually doing, being the behavior analyst,
Hmm.
right, you see a pattern in some of the themes and the things that we're
Yeah.
saying, language that we're saying, because we might not all have the same experience, but a very
Hmm.
similar experience, right?
Yeah.
So I think the committed action and being an anti-racist and always committing to evolving, right? And then
Yeah.
let that be known, right? There's going to be certain things that you absolutely cannot do because, again, it's 30 years, it's 100 years, it's 200 years of shit
Yeah.
and guck, right?
Yeah.
And we're slowly trying to climb ourselves out of that while we're
Yeah.
also slowly being pushed back
Yeah.
to do that, right? And so I think that's the best thing to do is
Yeah.
committed to being an anti-racist,
Yeah.
right? It's one thing to say, like, I recognize microaggressives, I recognize the system, I
Yes.
recognize this, but it's a totally different thing. And I know the people of other cultures that I feel most comfortable around are committed to being an anti-racist,
Yeah.
right? And that's when I can show up more of myself without fear of like judgment or backlash or anything like that. But then from a system standpoint, passing legislation like the Crown Act, right? Like not, knowing the history between the verbal behavior of locks versus dreads, right? And what that really looked like, knowing the history of there's this huge movement of like what's appropriate dress at work in the office
Hmm.
and what's considered professional.
Yes.
We're seeing arguments about what women are allowed to wear on legislation floors
Hmm.
early or something like that. And it's like, I gotta have on a blazer, but it's like, so from a system standpoint, let's really look at, there's a story of a previous company I used to work for A white woman walks in, smells like weed, and it says, "Oh, my boyfriend has a medical card. That's why like my clothes will smell like that."
Mm,
A black woman comes in, smells like weed, she's fired right on the spot
mm,
without any explanation, just for the odor. We have to be committed to anti-racism, and until
mhm.
we are doing that in the workplace,
Yes.
everyone, whether you're black, indigenous, Indian, Asian, you know, Pacific Islander,
Yeah.
whatever, Eastern, until the majority is committed to anti-racism, we're
Yeah.
gonna get.
Yeah. No, 100%. And that was sort of an early lesson. I think anti-racism as a word is something that's been around for a while, but is new to a lot of people in the last couple of years. A couple of my early sort of pivotal moments in my sort of anti-racism journey. One was Dr. Nasia, um, and the workshops that she put on with Scott Herbst right after,
Mhm.
like a week after the George Floyd murder or something like that. She did
Yeah.
like a month-long series of workshops, and I went to all of them. They were free, and she got people talking and feeling super uncomfortable. And gosh, discomfort was all I was feeling in June of 2020. Lots of twisting and turning. It was great though, and it was powerful. And I had her on the podcast recently, and I thanked her for that, for starting me on the road. The other thing was, and I'm not a reader. I got a bookshelf here, but I haven't opened half of these books.
They should look. They look good on the shelf.
Yeah, they do look good. I've opened like certain pages, but that's about it.
Yeah.
And generally I've not been a nonfiction reader ever. But I don't know what possessed me beyond, I think the motivation to take out an Ibrahim Kendi book from the library called Stamped from the Beginning, which it's thick. It's like 500-600 pages, but it's the literal, history of racism in the world in a lot of ways. Like it goes back, I feel like it goes back to like the 14 or 1500s, and tells you the whole story. And he's a historian, so that's sort of, he's writing from that perspective. Lots of dates, and I hated dates in history class in public school, but he goes through them all, and you know I used to think I had no idea about racism because I didn't know about sort of, civil rights or whatever. But open that book up, and I really didn't know anything about racism and kind of how it forms and how it built over, and what true intergenerational genetic,
Mhm.
trauma looks like. Like that book, it's a hard read, that book, not just in terms of sort of the information you're going to learn, but just in terms of how thick it is, and how much stuff there is. But what I really learned from that, not only the whole history, and it just and I learned about kind of Black excellence, and about what, that it's not just, that Black people weren't born into slavery. There's a whole, there's
The whole
eon there,
generation of
there's
like kings.
eons of history,
Yeah.
which I'm starting to get connecting to with the indigenous communities. We've learned a lot about that, particularly up here in kind of my
Yeah.
neck of the woods. But Black history is equally, if not more, um, amazing, historically, and how we just sort of shredded that to bits with bizarre theories like the climate theory, and others which folks can kind of look up. But you know, um, but what I learned about was sort of, that there's no such thing as being, as saying, you can't even say I'm not a racist, and there's no such thing as not being racist. You're either a racist or you're an anti-racist. There's no sort of
There's no middle ground.
there's no sort of netherworld in between. You know,
Right.
unless you're just frozen in time, not breathing. And if you're, I guess, if you're in, you know, space age cryogenic suspended animation, okay, at that moment you are not a racist, sure. But as soon as you start breathing and talking, you're one of the two. And that was a fundamental shift for me, you know. And you know, and I couldn't immediately go on to the, well, I'm an anti-racist then, you know, because I wasn't. You know, I said, and that's
Action,
yeah.
you know.
So I'm a racist. That's what it was, and I had to say that over and over again, really loud, and not feel like I had to sort of end my life because I said that, you know, and I still am, you know, but I think I'm both now. And I don't know what the point of that was, but I think it was just sort of trying to understand that, you know,
The committed action.
yeah, you either got you got to do. You're always doing something.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing something to actively, you know, work against the systems, then you're automatically working with the systems. You're
Right.
automatically making things worse by not doing anything. And that was that was a fundamental shift in my thinking. And I think that's something that, you know, any person out there that, you know, maybe identifies as being from the, you know, a privileged majority background, a non-oppressed background. That's what you gotta. That's the switch you gotta put on. You gotta flip. Are you a BCBA supervisor looking to streamline your practice? Or maybe you're working towards your BCBA and need to find the right supervisor. Homehouse offers tools that make supervision so much more enjoyable for both supervisor and supervisee. For supervisors, they offer easy meeting documentation, competency tracking, monthly verification forms, a built-in supervision curriculum, and so much more. For supervisees, Homehouse has a fieldwork tracker with built-in auditing, monthly verification forms, a curriculum, quizzes, and more. If you're looking for a supervisor, they even have a supervision marketplace where you can connect with BCBAs until you find your perfect match, kind of like professional dating. For more information, go to whomhouse.com/speak or search Whomhouse on Google. The second secret word is growing.
Right. And it's difficult.
Yeah.
Even within ourselves, right? Like, you know, nobody says that people of color don't have their own racism to work through, don't
Yeah.
have their own prejudice to work through, right?
Yeah.
We, you know, the Black community, we have a lot of things to work on with other marginalized communities
Yeah.
that we uphold, right? Like, no one likes to talk about the very anti-LGBTQIA plus our generations of our community have been in. Right? And how our current Black trans, Black LGBTQ plus community feel from our elders and from our parents, from our grandparents, right? From our own people, and how we understand Black sexuality. And, you know, I know a lot is focused on white individuals with every other race, right?
Sure.
I'm not saying that doesn't need to be top priority, because it does,
Yeah,
right? It needs to be
absolutely.
top priority, right? However, I am understanding that there is some intersectionality within that, and we have our own things that we need to work on, right? So at BABA, one of the things that we are really committed to with our conference is utilizing the financial aspects of the conference as a form of activism and as a form of advocacy. And so we are really committed to using, like, everyone loves our swag bags. They always talk about our swag bags, right? And our swag bags are pretty darn nice, okay? Absolutely. You definitely not going to see your average, like, your pen and your notebook and, like, here's a sticker, right? But in our swag bags, we specifically use that to, you know, partner with Black-owned businesses, right? But what about the intersectionality within that? We specifically have chosen to do neurodivergent Black-owned businesses, or Black-owned businesses that are identifying the LGBTQ plus IA, and using that as a form of activism. I talked about it at I had a conference logistics panel at APBA with a research team that I'm part of, and we talked about how organizations and people can just like shift where their dollars are going as a form of activism.
Yes.
And as a form of, I am committed to action to being an anti-racist in this manner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not those organizations get thousands and thousands of dollars. I know because we put on a conference, so I know the money. And I know when you're charging, I saw a conference charging $850 for registration.
Yes.
What? But you're getting that money. How are you using some of those funds as committed initiatives to better diversity and better inclusion?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good. Maybe we can finish off by talking a bit more about BABA for folks, because I don't know that everybody knows what BABA is. In fact, I had a conversation the other day with someone that I thought would know what it is, and then they didn't know what BABA meant, and they were a Black behavior analyst.
Yep. There are a ton of Black behavior analysts who do not know we exist.
Yeah.
And we are, one of our recruitment efforts that we're doing is we're actually going to speak with the ABA agencies, because we realize our people are not at the conferences. Our people are not, going to the professional development arenas, because those arenas have historically not been for us, and there's some inclusion issues, right? But we know that we have we make up 13% of behavior technicians.
Right.
So we are going to the ABA agencies to speak in front of their staff, to let the staff know we exist, right? And that's where we're really focusing our recruitment efforts. So I know traditionally, people are like, oh, BABA doesn't have a vendor table at this conference, that conference, things like that. Yes, we know, but our people are not going to the conferences. We want to go where our people are going.
Yes.
They're technicians right now. They're in community colleges right now, but we want more and more, for the behavior analysts who don't know about us to learn about us. And we are, trying to reach them. So thank you for, having, have you heard of BABA? Just making sure they're a great community. Because we have a lot of Black clinicians who still do not know about BABA.
Yeah. So I like to just know a little bit more about it. Like, so when was it founded? Were you involved in the founding, or?
No, so I was not. So BABA was founded, it started off as a Facebook page. And Kat Jackson, who is a BCBA now in Alabama, in Alabama, I think she's still there, started this Facebook page. Okay. She started it back in I think 2017, 2018, something like that. And that's how I found it, right? It was a Facebook page, and I was just Googling where are people at? And she just started it because she was experiencing a lot of racism and wanted to know, is there an organization or is there a safe space for us in this industry? And so Kat Jackson started it, and BABA actually had a president and a vice president before myself and Tiana, and not many people know that. So I would like to shout out Davina and Dee Hazard. They were the founding president and vice president, and Kat Jackson was the founder of BABA.
Okay.
And then when we got incorporated and things like that, Davina and Dee kind of stepped away. And then I was voluntold that I needed to be the president of BABA, and Tiana Moore was the vice president of BABA. And so from there, with Tiana and my leadership, BABA has developed into what you see today. So we do a little bit of everything, and we are very proud of what we have accomplished so far. We want to focus on being a legacy organization and a legacy business, and not just kind of popping up and then fizzling off and things like that. So we function with a very business mindset. And the new president and new vice president is Tia Glover is the president, and then Dr. Danielle Beal is the current vice president of BABA. So yeah, I think our main mission is we want to uplift, educate, and empower the Black community and anybody who stands behind the Black community. And I
Mm,
think we do a really, really good job at that, without while continuing to center the Black clinician, the Black technician,
mhm,
the Black family.
mm,
And everything we do is definitely for us, by us. And we make that known. And I think that is different than what the typical professional development arena is
mm,
used to. And so
mm,
we have some organizations that we ruffle some feathers. We have some people that are jealous, envious, and we were talking about that earlier.
mhm, mhm.
But we are here to uplift the Black community. And so if you're on that train, come join us. And if not, there are other organizations.
Yeah, yeah. And so when was that's awesome. When was the first conference?
Yeah, so the first conference was virtual in June 2021.
Mm,
Yes. June 2021, we had a virtual conference because it was COVID. We
mhm,
had planned on having an in-person conference, but COVID.
mhm,
So we had a virtual conference. We had Dr. Antonio Harrison, Dr. Nasia Swencion Uluzi, and Denisha Jingles were our keynote speakers
mm.
that year. And we had over uh, 70 speakers. We had over 600 attendees.
Wow,
We were, and through virtual computer, you felt the community, you
you
felt the,
did. Wow.
um, and I think that was the pillar that changed the name of the game for conferences in behavior analysis, and
Mhm.
also was a pillar moment of changing what people expect from professional development organizations.
So last year then was the first live one,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
you know, I wasn't there, but and I wasn't at the virtual one either, but like I wanted to be there last year because it's I've never heard so much buzz about a conference in my entire life. Like, and the flagship conference for us is ABAI, and that's a giant thing. I've been to a couple of those, and they're massive, and but they were different, and I know ABI is not really, is is hopefully doing some learning right now, because I think being sort of the, I'm not looking to slam them, but sort of being sort of the main conference in our field for a long time. um um
Yeah.
Baba's Baba, and I think Weeba as well in some ways, and I think now APBA, with sort of Tyra at the helm, um, are starting to show the field that there's not just one way to do a conference. There's not just one way to sort of get folks together, and there's a way to actually get folks together. Like I feel like ABAI doesn't get folks together, unless you've been in the field for a long time. It gets a lot of folks exposed to things, but I mean, I didn't love my experiences at those conferences. I liked being there to learn, and I was really, you know energized by some of the particular topics and whatnot. Um, but it just sounds like Baba is a whole other game when it comes to conferences, and I think you've really sort of started to, you know I don't know, up the standard is the right word, but sort of change it, in such a good way.
Yeah. Um, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but ultimately, I'm glad that the community is seeing what Baba is doing with everything that we do,
Mm,
even outside of the conferences, and it's changing because they see and they hear and they know how successful we have been, but we are just doing what has not been done for us. You know, prior to BABA, there were no conferences that offered scholarships to attend, right? You either had the money or you didn't, and it was not their concern if you didn't have it. BABA came out on a virtual conference and said, here's some scholarships, here's some money. We spent $23,000 in our first in-person conference getting people there because we know that people of color have a financial difference to attend, right? And just people in general, right? Whether that was offered to whether if you were an ally and advocate member or a professional member, early career member, right? And so with our scholarships, the feel, I was having a conversation with a very well-known clinician in our field, and they said, I can't wait to go to BABA when I'm invited. And I said, oh, that's funny because you'll never be invited to BABA because we only invite Black clinicians, right? Everyone else that you see presenting at BABA that is not Black has submitted a call for papers.
Yeah.
They had named this clinician. They said, they told me, you do invite white clinicians because so-and-so presented there. And I said, so-and-so humbled themselves and submitted a call for papers. Let me tell you, right? And so I think we're also showing the field that guess what? Black people can be centered and you don't have to be centered in professional development spaces. And you gotta be okay with that if you want to come, right? If you do not come to BABA, if you are not comfortable not being centered, because you're not going to be the majority. This is a majority Black attended conference. We center Black research, Black clinicians, Black families. We're also sprinkling in support for other people. We have our BABA besties and things like that. And so I think as a whole, you're right. You haven't seen not as nearly as much buzz about a conference as you do BABA, as you do about the organization in itself, right? And we only invite like a good 3 speakers, and everyone else you see just wants to speak to our community, wants to be on our platform because we also treat people damn good, our customer service and our community efforts are great, but we do other things other than the conference as well, right? Like we have weekly study sessions for students put on by Black teachers, right? We have mentorship provided to our clinicians put on by Black clinicians, right? We have the special interest group Black Men in ABA put on by Duran Chapman and Dr. Bruce Tenor. We have cohort training for business development. We partner.
The third secret word is leader.
With other organizations for different trainings, right? And so we do so much on top of tuition-based scholarships and things. So like I said, we're just doing what has not been done for us.
And there's something else too that I think, folks I think are picking up on it, and a reason for the buzz is the topics and speakers themselves are so different from what we're used to hearing and listening to forever and ever and ever and reading and so on and so forth. I've said this before. I don't just have Black guests on the podcast because they're Black, because there's lots of Black professionals out there that I don't have on the podcast. But I may get to you, and hopefully I do. But one thing that I've noticed that has been really, mind altering, and again, and I hadn't noticed before because I was being racist, was that because I didn't expect it, I guess, or didn't even look for it, I guess, is including yourself, every Black individual that I've had on the podcast and talked to has blown my mind with their perspective, their knowledge, their ideas. You know, when you grow up in kind of a white-centered environment, you're only open to sort of white-centered sort of thoughts, and there is that sort of, we're at the top of the food chain, kind of mentality that, that learning from sort of, the best, the most humble or whatever white professional, is the best you're going to get, and it's going to be the highlight perspective in your life. And that's what you need to kind of empower you to move forward, is that white voice. To suddenly now hear all of these Black voices that have just a whole other different, you talk about resilience, the resilience alone, have this whole other sort of just mindset and perspective and presentation and knowledge and authenticity and all this stuff that you don't see. I never saw in the white professionals that I was exposed to, and just there's just a whole other side. It's a worldview. I've heard that phrase a few times, and I've used it. It's this worldview that you just can't quantify until you start having these interactions. And it's similar with the Indigenous worldviews. Those have also equally blown my mind. I had some really interesting conversations with Indigenous folks, and some Indigenous behavior analysts, which I think that number is probably even lower in terms of the percentage, because I think I know like 3 or 4 now in Canada. But the perspectives are just like a part of me, doesn't want to hear, doesn't have time to hear any more white speakers, because I feel like I've heard all that already, and I've had all that. There's a few folks out there that still have some interesting new stuff to say, or are talking about topics that I've never heard about, but they're few and far between compared to the conversation I've been having with people of color, and it's just it's mind blowing.
Yeah, 2 different playing fields.
Yeah,
right? And I think that, again, because of the oppression, because of our experience, we have to be 10 times better to be taken seriously. You have to see even all the people that you're talking to, right? All the Black clinicians, all the BIPOC clinicians that you're speaking to. A good chunk of them have never been invited keynote speakers.
Right.
A good chunk of them have never been invited to speak anywhere. Maybe your podcast was the first time, to just put their information out there, because, we're so used to just going in our network and in our bubble, and the people at play also don't interact with any BIPOC individuals to even know what they're doing, to know that it's actually 10 times better than the mediocrity that we've been getting.
Yes.
Right. And I'm not saying that, I want to make it very clear, and anybody who knows me knows this. It's not that white clinicians, the majority of the clinicians, are also not doing innovative things, because right. What I know is, if you are actually doing the research on innovation, you're going to see more BIPOC people doing more innovative things than the majority of the clinicians. There's a conference organization that I can't wait to possibly get an email across my email inviting me to speak there. But they had asked BABA to help promote their conference, right? To send out some marketing advertisements. We have a lot of organizations who want to market to our community, but don't want to be committed to our community, right? And that's a whole other podcast conversation.
Yeah, for sure it is. Yeah.
But we went back and said, you have no people of color on your lineup. You want the Black organization to help promote this, because people recognize the impact that BABA has, and I'm very, very proud of that. And it's a certain validation that people get when they see Obaba's supporting them. Obaba is reposting that, right? And I understand that, and we understand that. But when asked your speaker selection process, because there's not a single person of color nor a Black person on there, the president of the organization said, "Oh, are they trying to make us change our speaker selection process?" The person said, "No, they're just asking what it is." Right? I'm not saying change anything. I'm just saying, how did you not? How did this come about?
Yeah.
And they said, well, let them know we choose the best speakers. That's our process. Okay. We will not be promoting this.
Yeah.
And you need to do your own work over there, right? And now, they're in, my text messages, can you help us? I thought you choose the best speakers. So I think that, again, if these conferences were doing the research, you would see more people of color speaking.
Totally, you would.
It's hand down. And we don't have a shortage of that at BABA. Like I have a database of 50 speakers for the next 10 years. And I'm like, yep, this is it. Of all Black clinicians, right? And there has to be a better process. There was an article that came out in November of last year, November 2022. And it looked at the top 20 speakers at conferences across 2010 to 2015. And 19 of them were white. One was Asian American. And Pat Fryman had put on 18 presentations, of which 12 of them were keynote speakers at state associations or ABA. And so Pat Fryman, great man, does a lot of stuff, great speaker, right? But he had been recycled 12 times for keynotes, and not a single Black clinician was on that list. Not a single Latinx clinician was on that list. Not a single Indigenous clinician was on that list. But yeah, everybody coming on your show, I've been doing this for 20 years, 30 years. Nasia was doing presentations out of her house for years. So Baba invited her. Now you see her everywhere, right? Because Baba gave her a platform.
Yep.
But not that these other associations and conferences had the same means of YouTube. That's how I found Nasia. She has a YouTube channel. That's how I found her. And I was like, we've got to have her. We're not doing anything that other people are not capable of. Right? So we have to do a better job at diversifying our speakers, at diversifying the experience, because it's not just the speakers that get the people to this conference, it's the field. It's the field.
Wow. Well, way to go, Baba.
Way to go, Baba. We're made up of an e-board of like 15 now. Like I said, Tia and Danielle are doing an amazing job at, continuing to push the mission, continuing to meet our community. And our advisory board, we have an advisory board of 15 people who also help guide our organization. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do all the things.
So how big is BABA these days? How many members do you have? And
so the other day I checked, we have 371 members, comprised of we have like 5 different membership tiers. So 371 currently.
And how many of those are Black members,
I actually don't know that number.
Yeah.
I don't know that number. I would probably want to say like 80% of that. We do have a large ally and advocate membership. Right. So for those who don't know, you do not have to be Black to join the organization. You can.
I'm a member.
As an ally and advocate. Yes. I think it's like $40 or something like that. You get benefits as well, but we accept any and everyone into our organization, and as long as you're committed to being an anti-racist as you're interacting with our community, or just even willing to just learn, we welcome you 100%.
The free monthly CEU for members that you folks do is worth it alone for the membership.
Yes.
So if you want an ally membership, I mean, they're great speakers every month, and a free CEU and
Free CEU, sometimes a couple,
couple, yeah,
of
absolutely.
what we got going on.
Have you? I mean, I know it's early days still. I think for BABA in a lot of, obviously. I mean, it's 5 years, sort of, whatever. Are you sort of with the onset of this whole change in the BACB and whatnot around the certifying folks around the world? Have you looked at sort of reaching out and inviting, and trying to get sort of international members and whatnot? I mean, obviously you've got your base is going to be the US. I mean, like you said, you only have 300 and whatever members and
Right.
just growing in the US alone with the number of, most of the Black professionals are probably in the US. I mean, that's certainly the place to focus, but just wondering, mostly because of when I did that promotion in February for Black History Month, I got a lot of the free CE requests came out of Africa. And there were a lot of African and ABA professionals that were, sort of keen to get more of this information and looking to sort of, and looking for support. And, I mean, I'm interviewing next week, like some behavior analysts from Ghana and Nigeria, and just sort of hear the stories they have of because they're like literally, some of them are the first BCBAs in their country. Count on one hand how many professionals are all together. They're starting these fields in their nations, and a few of them, the only way they get any kind of training or certification is through, American universities, often online. There's some problems around sort of an RBT training, in that basically they're overtraining. There's all these cheap or easy RBT courses in America that are offered to people overseas, and so all these folks are getting certified as RBTs in countries that have no BCBAs, no behavior analysts to supervise them, which is creating other problems. And so I'm just kind of wondering about sort of supports that could be available for those folks in the future.
Yeah. So we do actually work with the international community. We work with Autism Compassion's Africa, ACA. They have companies in both Ghana, Nigeria, and I believe possibly opening up one in South Africa. But
those are actually the folks I'm interviewing are from.
Okay, Joy. Are you interviewing Joy?
I'm interviewing Joy and Josephine.
Josephine, yes. Yeah. Listen, I've been working with them for some years.
Oh, wow.
So they are great. BABA has supported them. Study Notes ABA has supported them. So we do. We've been trying for years to get them over here for the conference as well. But visa red tape and things is a huge. It's been our issue for the last 3 years. We've been trying to get them over here. So we do a lot for them. Actually, so we offer memberships for free. We had international student memberships, but some people don't realize is PayPal actually doesn't allow for payments to come out of certain countries. Those certain countries include Ghana and Nigeria.
Wow.
So the membership payment system we were using previously with PayPal did not allow for them to purchase membership because they lived in this identified country. So you want to talk again, systemic, okay? How it can seep into nonprofits and the international community. So we've had to figure out. So we ended up having to take our international student membership away because we were using PayPal, switch over to a whole new system, a whole new website. As people can see, we have a new updated membership portal type website, and moving away from PayPal. But all of that takes time, right? So in the meantime, they still have access to our study groups. We found alternative ways to get them their student membership.
Awesome.
But even outside of Africa, we had a Kansha who we've been able to support out of India and Australia.
Yes.
Georgiana Koyoma
Of course.
was keynote speaker out of the UK.
Yeah.
We have a couple Canadian members over there near you. But we absolutely recognize particularly that we have to not exclude our international community in relation to BABA, particularly our African-based countries, right? Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Morocco. The UAE has a lot of Black clinicians over there as well. And so, we're trying to figure out ways. Again, we offer a lot of free stuff. And to our members, including our international community, because of the financial difference. And I don't think as clinicians in the States, we don't think about the financial difference, right? For every dollar, they make like 5 cents.
Yeah.
Right? So when we're talking about the cost of our conference, the cost of membership, the cost of trainings, the time of day that we have trainings, right? So our entire Black History Month fundraiser were to support the Commit and Act organization in Sierra Leone.
Right.
We did a fundraising CEUs where we had Brianna Kelly, Malika Pritchett, and Denisha Jingles speaking on areas of behavior analysis associated with that organization. But we also had to think about the day that we have those and the time that we have those. Is it in the crack of midnight, 1, 2 a.m. for them, for an organization that we're trying to support? So we want to be able to support more. We want to figure out a way to get past this visa red tape. So if there's a lawyer, immigration lawyer out there listening, please email me because work this out. But Joy and Josephine are great women. They're doing a lot. Whitney Hamill, who is supporting them over there, is amazing and really does a really good job of not centering herself and centering the people from there, and how does behavior analysis need to look for them. They also presented at our conference, our virtual conference.
Oh wow, awesome.
As well,
well, I'm glad to hear that. I haven't asked anyone about that yet, but I was curious, sort of, what resources are available to folks. So that's awesome that you're doing that.
Study Notes ABA has also done an amazing job. Shout out to Casey and Leah and Jordan on just study materials as well. The cost of those study materials. So Study Notes ABA has really assisted us in how do we get them certified or get the materials, connected with the IBAO and QABA and things like that.
Awesome. Cool. Wow.
A lot going on behind the scenes.
Lots of cool stuff going on, Adrienne. Right on. Well, maybe we can just finish off by talking about this year's conference. So because which will force me to get this episode out before that happens. So what, anything cool, different happening this year?
Yeah. So we're gonna be back in Detroit this year. It's gonna be our last year in Detroit. We wanted to stay stable with the location as we were starting, which is the best decision we could have made. We have Dr. Jamila Watson Thompson, who's out of the University of Kentucky.
Kansas, I think.
Kansas. I'm sorry. She is going to be one of our keynote speakers. She's going to be discussing community collective activism and behavior analysis, and what does that look like?
She's amazing.
Yes, she is. She's great. Dr. Ajamu Nkosi, who is going to be our other keynote speaker, and he is the co-founder of the IBAO, which is the International Behavior Analyst Certification Accreditation organization. So he's going to be discussing severe problem behavior and how to treat that in the school system. Nice. And then we have Anika Costa, who is out of Florida, who works with Brett Devoni Associates and does a lot with Dr. Polly Devani, out of Florida, and she's going to be discussing collaboration of behavior analysts and school teams.
Awesome.
And so we have a ton of presentations this year. We have a lot on OBM, a lot on school-based behavior, but a lot more clinical application as well. And I think that's really nice to see for Black clinicians, because I think a lot of times we get stuck or put in a box of discussing DEI and not discussing efforts, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's amazing that we're going to be able to shine a light on the clinical work that Black clinicians are doing. And we have Michael Reynolds out of California discussing parent training. We have Dr. Nicole Collins discussing toileting. You know, we have so many different things, and I'm just really Kiara and Jessica out of Michigan Western University talking about precision teaching, right? And fluency. And so we're going to have a lot of examples of different things, but we're going to have some fun too, right? So we have our events, and if Black people are not going to do anything, we're going to party at the same time. So we have our networking event this year where we rented out a floor on the Princess Boat, which is a historical boat in Detroit. And so we're going to be able to have a 4-hour boat ride with food and all the things and fun. And at the same time as our networking event is also going to be a Motown event happening on the floor below us. And so guests will be able to go down to the Motown event as well.
Awesome.
Motown people can't come up to us, but we can go down there. Absolutely. Because the Motown Museum was actually being renovated last year, so no one was able to go. And so this year, we thought that was really nice. And then, of course, we have our C. Richard Spates Awards reception. And if anybody knows anything about Dr. Richard Spates, he used to work at Western. He would be a great interviewee for you. Because he was one of the very first Black behaviorists in our field. He helped start up ABAI, worked with all those people, and was shunned out of research, was shunned out of our industry until, again, Baba. Dr. Linda LeBlanc introduced us to him, and he is a legend.
Cool.
Research him, but we have our awards reception gala that gets real formal, real fancy. But we give away our research, our Dr. Temple Lovelace Research Award, and our Dr. Samuel M. Turner Innovation Award to just highlight the efforts of Black clinicians in this field that are not getting highlighted by other organizations.
Yeah.
So again, for us, by us, to us. You know, it's definitely the theme there.
That's awesome. Right on. Cool. Well, I hope I can get there.
Make it happen.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, Adrienne. Really cool.
Thank you for having me. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much.
Yeah. Right on. We'll see you again.